In the age of the internet, there are so many different threats that are being posed to Islam. For example, ex-Muslims who decide to speak up and share their thoughts and stories. There's also the more obvious ones, like the fact that people are now able to point out logical and scientific inconsistencies and spread this to a wider audience. But I think there's another threat that we don't talk about nearly enough. How often do we hear the phrase, Islam is the fastest growing religion. Alhamdulillah, so many people are embracing Islam. But when people speak about this rapid increase, they never follow it up with the facts. So often they fail to mention the fact that Islam's growth is actually relying on one particular thing: birth rates. To put it simply, statistics are showing us that Muslim women have higher fertility rates in comparison to non-Muslim women. We see this reflected in data provided by Pew Research Center, which demonstrates that this is the case on a global scale. If we look at a more localized example like Australia, we can also see that our census data is reflecting and substantiating the same thing. So ultimately, what we know from this is that Islam's growth is relying on one particular group: women. In the West, Islam relies very heavily upon Muslim women to entice non-Muslim women to consider and embrace Islam. And of course, once that happens, those same women are then encouraged to go looking for a Muslim husband. We can see this reflected in real-life examples of former converts who are now ex-Muslims. After speaking with her, I learnt about how when she became a Muslim, she was constantly faced with the pressure of finding a husband, settling down, and fulfilling her role as a good Muslim woman. Also explained to me that this went as far as her dropping out of college after finding a husband just so that she could have Muslim children and fulfill the role of a wife. We see very similar things in cases like Deborah's story. What I'm hearing from both of these women is that the one thing that really, really drew them into Islam and made them want to stay was other women, their kindness, their generosity, their relatability, and the way that they were able to paint Islam as something that women would love. So once again, we're seeing the exact same trend here. Islam relying on women to secure its growth. If you grew up a Muslim woman like me, I want to ask you this. How many of you were told that you couldn't move out of home, couldn't travel overseas, or do anything of the sort without a mahram? Now, if you had male siblings, how did your freedom compare to theirs? Growing up in a Western country, I recognized that I had the privilege of secular freedoms to assist me in that department. As we see in places like Saudi Arabia, the requirement for a mahram is even reflected within legislation itself, taking that degree of control to a whole different level. Muslim women are taught that we need a mahram. We need that caretaker, that protector, that person who has that degree of responsibility over us. Islam places women in a position where we are forced to become reliant upon men. Be honest with me. How many of you who are or were a Muslim at one point thought to yourself, I need to find a husband so that I can be free? I know that there was certainly a long period of time in my life where I was thinking like that. As many of us are aware, verse 434 clearly describes the requirement for women to be obedient wives. We are even told that we can be subject to physical discipline if we don't fulfill this obligation. In other words, the Quran itself is enabling and justifying gendered domestic violence. Then of course this is further substantiated within the Hadith. For example, we see that Muhammad himself explained that a man will not be asked why he beat his wife. We see Aisha herself remarking on the battered and bruised body of a fellow Muslim believer. We see Aisha explaining that she has never seen anyone suffering as much as the believing women. Now, of course, Dawah boys will tell us that even though the Quran explicitly explains that we are to receive half the inheritance of a man, this is in fact good for us, and Islam treats us like queens. They tell us that a man is responsible for caring and looking after his wife and children, while a woman's money remains her own. Of course, what they conveniently exclude is the fact that this depiction of men as caretakers does nothing but maintain archaic heteronormative values and roles. In reality, what this is actually doing is undermining the ability of a woman to prosper and thrive independently. This degrades the capability of women as independent human beings and places unnecessary strain on men. The sexism and misogyny in this notion is so blatant. Muslim apologists will try to tell us that because men are required to provide women with a dowry in exchange for marriage, this explains the immense value of a woman. Truthfully and realistically, what the concept of a dowry actually does is make an attempt to quantify our worth as women, our worth as human beings. This depicts us as property, as an item that can be exchanged for gifts or money. Islam wants to pretend that women are something upon which you can place a price tag, when in reality, we are priceless. When we look at the concept of marriage, in addition to the fact that we can only marry Muslim men, there's also the issue that Muslim men can take 4 wives, whereas we are only permitted to have 1 husband. Within that marriage itself, Islam wants to pretend that we are fields, something upon which men can put forth their righteousness however and whenever they please. Islam tells us that if we deny our husbands the sexual gratification, that we will be cursed by the malaika, the angels. Islam even goes so far as to say that our silence equates to our consent. How can we even pretend that Islam isn't paving the way to marital rape? There's also the fact that Islam teaches us to shield our bodies away from the world. Islam teaches us that we are awra, that we are fitna. People will try to argue that Islamic modesty standards and requirement for hijab are also enforced upon men, but of course they'll conveniently exclude the fact that the degree to which men are expected to cover pales in comparison to the expectations enforced upon women. Islam tries to pretend that this is a way to prevent us from being sexualized and abused. Islamic apologists will tell us that we can be compared to wrapped and unwrapped candy, that we are jewels which need to be shielded in layers of fabric. All this done under the disguise of modesty. And of course, they conveniently fail to mention the incredibly high rates of sexual assault occurring in Muslim countries where women are covering. As we know, this even includes the holy city of Mecca itself. Apologists will brush over the implications of purity culture in practice. They will make no mention of the fact that this paves the way, justifies and substantiates rape culture and victim blaming. Islam tells us that women can never be successful leaders. Islam degrades our intelligence. It depicts periods as dirty and impure. It tells us that we are ungrateful. We are evil omens that can be compared to animals and property. Islam very clearly articulates that the majority of women are destined for hell. The fact of the matter is this: Islam is a religion created by men for men. There were no female prophets in Islam. The Quran itself largely fails to even speak to women directly. To all my Muslim and ex-Muslim sisters around the world, I want you to know this. The author of the Quran may have failed to even bother speaking to you directly, but today I'm here to speak specifically to you. As I hope you can see, Islam relies on our obedience, our oppression, our submission. You deserve more than a religion that seeks to degrade and control every aspect of your life as a female. You deserve more than to have your freedom restricted and dictated by the sexual perversions of a dead 7th century man. In the face of our autonomy, our empowerment, and our liberation, Islam quivers with fear. There are dour boys out there who will try desperately to emotionally manipulate you and guilt trip you into conforming. They will try to threaten and intimidate you should you dare to dissent. Should you dare to take off your hijab, make your own choices, and step out of the carefully curated box that is Islam. These men so desperately want to fight for maintaining an ideology that gives them a sense of authority they otherwise would not possess. Don't let them. You and you alone are the only person who speaks for yourself. And just as these dour boys shed tears in the face of our liberation, so too will Islam. If we stand in solidarity to support each other's liberation, we are stronger than any patriarchal ideology out there that seeks to control us. We need to support each other's right to disbelieve, to dissent, to make our own choices, to live our lives according to no one's terms and conditions except our own. So to all the women out there around the world who are watching this, hear me loud and clear when I say that the greatest threat to Islam today, right now, is you.